Hi everyone, Dave here, East Rosebud Fly and Tackle in Billings, Montana. We're going to continue our series here with tying different flies for you. The fly we're going to tie today is the Royal Trude. The Trude is a pattern type. It's a downwing fly it can represent anything from a stonefly, a caddis fly, a hopper. It's a good searching pattern for all types of fishing. A good amount of hackle up front. This is a commercially tied fly. We'll do a little bit better here. We're using golden pheasant tippets for the tail, and what makes it a royal is the three-part abdomen. We have peacock herl, red floss, peacock herl, and then the rest of the body. You can tie all types of trudes, lime trudes, any color you want. So I say this is kind of a pattern template. It's been around for a long time. I couldn't tell you exactly how long, but it's a popular fly. It's an excellent searching fly. What I'm going to use here, we're going to use a size 14, 1X long dry fly hook. I like the 1X long because we have a lot going on here on the shank of the fly. I'm using Vivas 8/0 thread. I like Vivas thread when I need a lot of strength, and tying down calf tail can be difficult because it's not a hollow hair, it's a solid hair and very slippery. So we're going to start off here with our thread at about the 75% point. We want to preserve this front end of the fly for our downwing and our hackle. And that's perhaps the part most tyers find difficult, is the proportions on this fly when we come to the royal part of it. Golden pheasant tippet, you can buy it in a full crest like this. You can buy it in separate hackles. The golden pheasant is one of what we call the ornamental pheasants. There's a ton of them. There's the golden pheasant, the blue-eared, the silver, the Lady Amherst, and they're just mostly raised just for their feathers. So we're going to take, I like to have a tippet that I know I'm going to have some barring on the tail, and that depends of course on the size and length of the hook. Now, golden pheasant tippet is different from your normal hackle in that if you want to keep the tips straight, you can't just pull them out straight from the quill and cut them. You have to cut them at an angle from the quill. So you want to make sure that your shortest feather is going to be long enough for your purposes. So try to keep the ends straight like this, and then just cut a diagonal along the quill, and you can see how I have a tapered cut there. Alright, again, we want to try to keep these tippets as even as we can. I'm going to measure these to be about half a shank long, like so. Now we'll make it almost a full shank. Alright, when you tie in your tailing material, hold it about 45 degrees to your side. Take one soft loop over it, take another loop directly in front of that. That helps to carry that tailing material right up on top of the hook. Then with your second loop, then you can pull down and tighten it. It's not the best tail I've ever tied, but it'll do for now. Now, to keep our abdomen smooth for the upcoming events, we want to make sure that we wrap this tippet forward, cut it off as close to the hook as you can. Keep that smooth underbody. Wrap again back up to about the 75% point. Now we're going to be using Peacock Herl on this fly, and there are a lot of different ways that you can reinforce the Peacock Herl, and you have to. Peacock Herl is fairly delicate. One trout tooth nick and the whole fly comes undone. What I'm going to be using is some gold wire. This is extra small gold wire, and this is what we're going to use to reinforce the Peacock Herl. As we tie that in, I will discuss a couple of other ways that you can reinforce that without using wire. But I also like the effect that the wire has on the abdomen, which you'll see once we tie it. I mean, if you're going to tie a royal something, you might as well make it look royal. So since we are going to reverse wrap this wire or reverse palmer it, we're going to tie it on our side of the hook. Very easy way. Everything's 90 degrees. Put your wire in, catch it with a thread wrap, pull it back so that you don't have a nub, and then wrap smoothly over it, keeping the wire slightly down on your side so that the thread torque carries it up to the side. We're going to come right back here at the beginning of the tail. Alright, when you look at this fly, like I say, you have to be very conscious of keeping this front third clean. You don't want anything on there. So we're going to divide this abdomen into 3 parts for Peacock Herl, floss, Peacock Herl. There's not a lot of room there. You can use an eyed stick, which is ideal. You'll get better quality Peacock Herl, or you can use strung herl like this. This herl comes from lower down on the quill, so the herl is not quite as thick as you would get on an eyed stick, but it's certainly usable. You just have to use more of it. So we're going to pull out about, half a dozen fibers here. Just kind of even them up. They don't have to be perfect since we're going to be cutting the tips off anyway. Even them up a little bit like this. The tips are too delicate to tie in. You'll break them off every time, so just count on cutting about 1 inch of it off. We'll lay this on the hook, again slightly to our side. 1 wrap, a second wrap right in front of it, carries that herl up to the top of the hook. We're going to stop our thread right here at the hook point. Now this is the point where you have some options of reinforcing this herl. You can bring this down, make a dubbing loop, wrap the herl. You can also bring your thread down, twist it around the Peacock Herl, and wrap your bobbin and your herl at the same time. We're getting around that by using the gold wire. All I'm going to do is give this about a twist. You don't want to twist it too much or you will break it off. And we're just going to, don't want to depress our tail, we're just going to make about 2.5 wraps. Now one thing you should get into the habit of, anytime you're tying things off on the abdomen, don't tie them off on the top. Tie them on the side or on the bottom. The reason for this, particularly if you're tying a fly that has any kind of a turkey quill wing case or anything like that, any of those stubs sticking up from wire or herl will poke through that wing case and split it. It's a very common problem. So if you get into the habit of tying things off anywhere but the top of the hook shank, you won't have that issue. Now if you have really good Peacock Herl, for example from an eyed stick, really high quality herl, you can lay this down, wrap over it 1/3 of the way up the hook shank, tie in your floss. This, not being an eyed stick, isn't the best quality, so we're going to go ahead and cut this off. If you try to extend this to another wrap, what happens is you get into where you have more quill than you have herl, and the fly looks ugly. We're using single strand floss here. Of course for the Royal we want red, although you can use any color you like. If you happen to have the old style floss that's multiple strands, 4-strand was very common, go ahead and remove 1 strand of it. So we're going to advance this thread again about 1/3 of the way up the hook shank. Sometimes it helps to wet that just a little bit so that it lays. Again, we need to be very conscious of our proportions here. A couple of wraps is all it takes to secure that. We're going to wrap back and we're going to wrap forward. We're going to have a double layer. And you can control the floss. You can flatten it, you can cord it up simply by twisting it. We're going to bring that right to the back of the peacock and then wrap forward. And I'm going to flatten this just a little bit so that it lays nice. And again, tie it off on the far side of the hook. Now you see I've gone a little bit over 1/3 here, but that's okay. We're going to wrap our Peacock Herl back over it just a little bit, but we're still preserving the front end of that hook. So back to the herl. I'm going to go ahead and select 6 more herls here. If you try to get away with just 1 or 2 herls, you'll be disappointed in the effect. It just simply won't be plump enough. And strung herl is inexpensive. So we'll cut off the tips of that again. Bring it slightly to our side. Let the thread torque. Bring that up over to the top. 2 wraps, bring the thread forward a couple of wraps, and again I'm just going to slightly twist this herl to just bunch it up a little bit, just a turn. And that twist makes that herl go back a little bit, so we're right up against the floss. A couple of turns, bring it to the far side, 2 wraps of thread, and snip it off close. Alright, well, we've managed to preserve pretty good proportions here, a third, a third, a third. Now we're going to take our extra small gold wire, bring it around the back side of the hook. I like to wrap this tightly for a couple of reasons. One, it does a better job of protecting the herl, and when it comes over the floss, I think it just looks prettier. So we'll make several tightly spaced wraps. But again, the primary purpose of the wire is not ornamental, it's structure. We want to preserve that peacock. Bring it on my side of the hook here. Make a couple of tight wraps to hold it down. You can helicopter this off. Anytime you helicopter wire off, you want to make sure that your thread is tight, or your wire will want to reverse wrap itself while you're trying to break it off. You can also just use tungsten carbide scissors. Alright, so now we're at the end of the peacock. We're going to go ahead and wrap a thread base for our calf tail up to the eye and back right to the base of the peacock. Okay? Calf tail is an often talked about, often cussed material. It can be difficult to work with simply because it's so kinky. It's hard to stack. Like I said before, it's a solid hair, it's slick, it can be hard to put on the hook shank. The most common error I find with people using calf tails, they don't use enough. Once you pick your piece of calf tail off, and the best portion of any calf tail is the middle 2/3. The ends tend to be very, very kinky, and the bottom, even if it is white, the hairs tend to be lots of different lengths. But you're going to pull out the short fibers off the base of this after you cut it off, and that's going to constitute about half of the clump that you cut off. So you want to make sure you get a good, healthy clump. You can always take some out. It's hard to put it back on. So we're going to take a good pinch of this, and I'll show you here. A good pinch of this, stand it up about 90 degrees, and cut it right down next to the tailbone itself. Now, that looks like an awful lot of hair for our Trude, but you'll be surprised how much we lose here. Grab the tips about a third of the way down from the top, like this, hold them firmly, and then just simply start pulling out all of these short hairs. These short hairs don't add to the length of the wing, all they do is add to the bulk of the tie-in, which we want to try to keep to the minimum size. So really take your time and clean out all of these short hairs before you stack it. If you have a lot of short hairs left in your clump, they're not going to stack, and calf tail is difficult enough to stack as it is. So we started off with something about twice the size of this. This may still be a little bit too much, but it's much easier to subtract it than it is to add. When you use your hair stacker, want to make sure that the tube is large enough in diameter that whatever size hair clump you put in has enough room to move. If it's restricted in there, it won't stack. The funnel is there for a reason. Just kind of swirl your stack of hair in there to try to get all the tips in there, and then let it drop. You want to make sure that whatever you're stacking, the hair does not come over the top of the stacker, or it won't stack. Your finger will be in the way. Hold it with your thumb and your middle finger, put your index finger over the top, and I apologize for the noise, but calf tail takes a lot of stacking. Alright, let's see what we got here. Pull it out of the tube. I'm not satisfied with that. So, back in it goes. Now on a smaller size hook, you could use calf hair, calf body hair. It's shorter, it's straight, it stacks easier, but it is limited in the length of it. So calf tail is better when you're tying the larger flies. All right, once more with a smile, see what we got here. All right, the ends are fairly even there. Check again for any short hairs. Probably a little much for that size fly, so all we're going to do is hold the tips firmly and pull out some of the extra calf tail. But if you end up with too small a clump, it's very difficult to add more and stack again. It just won't stack. So it's always better to start off large and go down. All right, this is our indicator. It needs to be visible. You can see on the commercial fly, it's a little on the skinny side. I like a little more wing than that. Pull off just a few more. And like any fly, I encourage you to tie at least a half a dozen. When you sit down at the bench, you'll learn to get your proportions, you'll learn to develop how much materials you need for different flies, and the quality of your fly will just get better and better and better. We want this wing, and this is a little up to you, but traditionally the wing is about half as long as the tail. So we'll mark it right there. Hold this very firmly on top of the hook. We're going to take one soft wrap over the top. We're going to take another wrap right in front of that. Pinch the calf tail and the hook together and really pull that down tight. We're going to make 3 or 4 really tight wraps here. Okay? Now, we're going to have to hackle this. So we want as smooth a base as we can. So what we do is we lift these tips up to about 45 degrees, lay your scissors parallel with the hook shank, and you want to cut this off as close to your thread wraps as you can without cutting your thread, so that we have this. Okay? It's a little bit long, but it'll work. Nice thing about having really nice sharp scissors is you can get in here and trim it right on the hook shank. I'm at a little of a disadvantage here in these videos in that I tie one fly. I don't get a chance to get a lot of practice. Now, anytime I use calf tail, I make sure I use some head cement, simply because the material is so slippery that you want to use everything you can to keep it down there. All right, now we'll, again, with tight thread wraps, we'll advance our thread right to the front of that overwing. Now we're going to hackle it with saddle hackle, brown hackle. Unfortunately, with the advance in the genetics here lately with saddle and rooster hackle, we have gotten a lot of very, very nice smaller hackle. It's long, it's dense, it has a high feather count, but what we have lost is the larger hackles, the 12s and the 14s, and since this was a size 14 hook, this is what we want to use. And I did a video earlier on the new Metz hackles that we have in. I'm very excited and that there are a lot of size 12 and 14 in those hackles. Brown hackle, for some reason, historically has not been quite as stiff as some of the other colors. Apparently it's a genetic thing, but anytime you're using brown hackle, you can count on wrapping a lot of it. The old-time books, if you look at them, the old flying books, always recommended that you tied in your hackle with the shiny side facing you. That way when you wrap the barbs marched forward. The reason for that is those older hackles were relatively soft, and you needed those hackle tips pointing forward to help support the fly on the water. That's no longer a reason. Our hackle today is so good that I prefer to tie it in with the shiny side facing me, and when I wrap it, that way the hackle is facing a little bit backwards and it makes the tie off much neater. So we're going to strip enough hackle stem here. I always like to strip a few extra fibers off the side that's going to wrap first. That helps to keep that first wrap from flaring the rest of the hackle. We're going to lay it on the side of the hook with the shiny side facing me. I'm going to tie it in so that that first wrap of hackle is naked hackle. And a few thread wraps here. And we're going to cut off the quill end before we get to the hook eye. It's a lot easier to cut it off then. Alright, we're going to get our hackle. And the first wrap, we want to be right up against the base of that wing. Okay, and see how nice that stands up. Now tilt your hackle slightly to the rear as you wrap. That will help you lay these wraps in as close as possible to the previous wrap. Keep your feather perpendicular to the hook shank. Okay, when we get up here, we need to preserve some eye length to tie off. We're going to bring the hackle over to the far side with one thread wrap. Then we're going to stand the hackle straight up. That helps us to get the thread to the hackle stem and not on the hackle. It makes a little cleaner tie off. We're going to reach in here and nip the tip of that off. Shorten up your thread so you've got good control. I like to sweep this hackle back away from the hook eye. Make a couple of wraps back towards the hackle to kind of stand it up and get it out of my way. I do have an errant hackle there. And the whip finish. Make sure your thread is parallel with the hook shank. 3 wraps. When you tighten your thread, always tighten it back. That's the only way you're going to lock that whip finish in. Cut off our thread. Clean that up just a little bit. And then a little bit of head set. You can, if you have the room, you can do a double 3-wrap whip finish and you won't need head cement at all. Now if we look at this compared to a commercially tied fly, I think the primary difference is it's just a little fuller. We use a little more materials. We have a fuller overwing on it and plenty of hackle there. So that's the Royal Trude. Give it a try. I think you'll like it. It's not only not a difficult fly to tie, it's an excellent attractor pattern for a lot of situations. Stoneflies, caddis flies, hoppers. It's just a good looking bushy fly. Thanks for joining in. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please contact us. Thank you.